Tom, Julia, and their two kids, Cassie and Ben, were on a boat trip in the ocean. Tom and Ben were fishing, and Julia decided to swim. But something in the water scared Julia, and she started to feel really bad. The boat was acting funny too, but Tom didn't notice because he was too busy fishing. Julia started to drown, and when Tom heard her screaming, he quickly jumped in to save her. With the help of the kids, they got her back on the boat. Tom was mad because he always said they should tell each other when they go swimming. Julia said sorry, and then they celebrated Ben's 13th birthday. They had cake and presents, and Cassie took a picture of the happy family. Suddenly, Cassie's boyfriend called her, but a storm interrupted the call. They rushed outside and saw giant whales around the boat. Tom said the whales must be lost because of the storm, but they were bumping into the boat and making it dangerous. Tom tried to fix things, but he got hurt. Julia helped bandage his cut, and they realized the boat was broken and they couldn't sail away. They only had water for 4 days, but Tom thought other boats would come to help. But then they saw strange glowing objects falling from the sky. These objects were getting closer, so Tom started the boat's engine to get away. But the engine broke down and they were stuck. The family went inside the boat to hide from the storm, but a strange ringing noise made them all feel sick. Tom tried to send a help signal, but nothing worked. In the morning, they saw that their boat was on a rocky desert instead of in the ocean. The water was gone, and the ocean had moved far away. Tom realized something bad happened to the earth. Cassie was very upset, and Julia started checking their supplies. Ben let some colorful balloons float into the sky, hoping someone would see them and help. As Tom sends out distress signals on the boat's radio, a voice crackles through. It's Naoto, captain of a small submersible. Naoto explains that they were deep underwater when the catastrophe hit, which allowed them to survive. However, all communication systems are down, and waiting for rescue is pointless. According to his calculations, the sea will return in about a week, but when it does, it will be violent. Naoto advises them to find higher ground immediately. Tom plots a course on the map, determined to reach Naoto within a couple of days. By morning, the family is almost ready to leave. As Tom steps out onto the deck, he spots a man with a dog approaching. He cautiously greets the stranger but quickly realizes the man is injured. Offering him water, Tom's kindness is repaid with violence. The man punches him, and Julia watches in horror as the stranger plunges a makeshift spear into Tom's chest. Julia rushes to her husband's side, but the dog keeps her at bay. Frozen with fear, she realizes Tom is beyond saving and dashes back to the yacht. The man pursues her, injuring her arm as she struggles onto the deck. Hearing their mother's screams, Cassie and Ben run to help, and together they barricade the cabin doors. Julia hides the children in a locker, handing Cassie a flare gun with strict instructions to use it only as a last resort. Meanwhile, the killer tries to break in. Eventually, he forces his way inside, heading straight for the galley in search of food. As the man hungrily devours a can, Julia arms herself with a kitchen knife and hides. When the killer enters the cabin, Julia leaps overboard, hiding under the yacht. The killer peers over the edge but doesn't see her. However, his dog sniffs her out and attacks. In self-defense, Julia kills the dog. Hearing its yelp, the killer investigates and finds the dog's lifeless body. While he is distracted, Julia sneaks back aboard through a porthole, only to fall directly into the killer's grasp. He beats her and throws her onto a couch, strangling her as Cassie watches in horror. Realizing it's time to act, Cassie grabs the flare gun and fires. The shot throws the killer aside, but the flare ignites the yacht. Julia orders the children to flee, grabbing the packed bags as the flames engulf the boat. The killer, injured but alive, pursues them. But as the boat explodes, she leads the children into the stony desert, where Ben finds Tom's body. And Julia kisses him goodbye, before dragging the children away from the approaching killer. The family takes shelter in a rocky canyon, but the only water they find is salty and undrinkable. Cassie offers Ben a sip of their remaining water, but he refuses, guilt-ridden over the balloons he had released earlier. Julia comforts him, explaining that it wasn't his fault, and urges her children to keep moving. Later, Ben stumbles upon the carcass of a hammerhead shark and tries to butcher it, but Julia spots the killer and tells the children to run. They race across a toxic waste field, weaving through piles of plastic and trash left behind by the ocean. As Ben becomes severely dehydrated, Julia gives him the last drops of water. Cassie, overwhelmed, breaks down, but Julia commands them to push forward. They eventually find the fuselage of a plane that had crashed long ago and crawl inside to rest. Julia reminisces about meeting Tom for the first time, recalling how they bonded when he was brought to her hospital with decompression sickness. The children weep as they say their final goodbyes to their father. During the night, Cassie hears a noise and steps outside, acting as bait for the killer. As he approaches, Julia ambushes him, stabbing him in the chest. In the morning, the family prepares to leave, but discovers the killer's body has been scavenged, a warning that something far more dangerous lurks in the desert. As they journey on, Ben sprints toward a salty puddle, managing to drink a few gulps before Julia drags him away. Soon, they build a makeshift shelter from some plastic chairs, resting in the shade. Julia hears strange sounds and wakes the children, urging them to run. In the distance, they spot a large ship surrounded by crashed containers and a few wandering survivors. Julia calls out to the people for help, but they retreat into a container and lock the doors. Moments later, thousands of giant crabs swarm the area. The family climbs onto a container, but not before Julia is wounded by one of the crabs. Julia, Cassie, and Ben sit on top of the container, watching in horror as giant crabs break through the crack in the doors below, killing everyone inside. Julia ties a scarf around her wounded leg and soon passes out from exhaustion. The next morning, she wakes up in a panic, alone, and calls out for her children. To her relief, she finds that the crabs have moved on, and the kids had gone down to search for food and weapons. Julia, still weak, cauterizes her wound as Ben inspects the weapons they manage to find. While searching through the wreckage and containers, they scavenge a small supply of food and water. In the pocket of one of the deceased, Julia discovers a radio. She contacts Naoto, who responds, revealing that he too was attacked by deep-sea creatures. He explains that the sea will soon return, which is why these arthropods are surfacing. Julia pleads with Naoto to save her children, but she's lost the map and doesn't know where to go. In response, Naoto fires a flare into the sky. Ben spots it in the distance, and the family begins their race toward the submarine. The journey proves difficult as the terrain of the dry seabed is treacherous. Cassie grows frustrated with her mother's focus on saving the children without discussing what will happen to her. Julia, determined and focused, pushes them forward, forcing them to pass through a canyon polluted with toxic waste. As they traverse the canyon, a rock slide suddenly strikes, separating Julia from Cassie and Ben. From her vantage point, Julia shouts for them to continue without her. Cassie leads her brother out of the canyon, and they finally reach Naoto's submarine. Naoto orders the children to board the sub immediately. Despite this, Cassie makes the bold decision to go back for her mother. She finds Julia fighting off another wave of crabs, her ammunition almost depleted. Desperately, Cassie scales the rock barrier and reaches out for her mother, pulling her to safety just as the crabs close in. The family reaches the submarine, but Naoto is overtaken by the crabs and killed. As they secure themselves aboard, a massive ocean wave appears on the horizon. The water rushes in, lifting the submarine and dragging it over the rocky seabed. Julia opens the hatch, and she and her children step out to find themselves in a ruined city, carried there by the returning ocean wave.